The rain that night didn't fall so much as it slashed across the city, like the sky itself wanted to wash away everything rotten clinging to the streets. I was 2 fingers deep into a glass of rye when the call came through. The kind of call you don't ignore. A woman's voice on the other end, trembling but sharp, telling me there'd been a killing down by the docks. She said my name like it was her last lifeline. Detective Logan, the one who doesn't look away when things get ugly. Cases like that, they don't just come to me, they stalk me. And this one I knew from the first syllable was going to be different. The kind of case that doesn't just test your instincts. It claws at your bones, chews at your sleep, makes you question why you ever wore the badge in the first place. By the time I got down there, the city was painted in red and blue flashes. Squad cars boxed off the pier, and the river carried that faint metallic tang only death leaves behind. The victim was sprawled against the rusted hull of a freighter, a young man in his 20s, his clothes soaked through, pockets turned inside out like someone had wanted us to believe this was a simple robbery. But even before I got close, I knew better. As a detective, I've learned the street tells you when something's off. The angles didn't fit, his shoes too clean for the mud around him, the watch still on his wrist, gleaming under the rain. Whoever did this wanted us to buy a cheap story. I don't buy cheap. I crouched by the body, letting the drizzle drip off my hat brim. The kid's eyes were frozen wide, staring out at the black water like he'd seen something before the end, something worth fearing. Behind me, the uniforms whispered. Too young, too brutal, too precise. I blocked them out. Noise only slows me down. What mattered was the silence, the way the city seemed to hold its breath. I asked for the ID. His name was Nathaniel Crane, 24 years old. A law student, according to the wallet tucked neatly into his coat. Not exactly the kind of kid who'd be tangling with the kind of men who dumped bodies at the pier, unless he'd stepped on the wrong set of toes. The first clue came fast, like a crack of lightning. His phone wasn't on him. In a world where people treat their phones like oxygen, that's as good as a confession that someone wanted whatever was on it buried. But what gnawed at me deeper was the phone call. The woman who'd summoned me here wasn't on scene. No witness, no trace, no name left behind, just a voice fading into the night. I didn't like ghosts on my payroll. I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling against the rain like a stubborn shadow. Something about this case already smelled wrong, and not just from the body. By dawn, I was back at my office, staring at the city bleeding through the blinds. Nathaniel Crane. The name wouldn't leave me alone. Neither would the look in his dead eyes. Like he'd wanted to tell me something, but his voice had been stolen before I arrived. I started digging. University records, professors, classmates. The kid was bright, ambitious, chasing justice in a world that didn't hand it out. Maybe he'd looked too close at something. Maybe he'd thought the law was enough. He would have learned fast that the law's a brittle shield in a city like this. That's when I found her. Emily Carver. A classmate, close enough to Nathaniel to be mentioned in passing by 3 different people. When I called her in, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Pale face, trembling hands, the works. She told me Nathaniel had been chasing a case of his own, digging into a local politician with ties to some dirty money. She didn't know details, or so she claimed, but her eyes flickered when she said it, a quick dart of fear she couldn't quite hide. I pressed her harder. She broke fast, said Nathaniel had been threatened, told to drop whatever he was working on. He hadn't listened, and now he was lying cold at the pier. It should have fit. It didn't. My gut twisted, telling me she knew more than she let on. But pushing further would have cracked her, and I wasn't ready to break my only lead. Not yet. That night the rain came back, heavy, relentless. I drove past the pier again, headlights cutting through the mist. Something in me couldn't let go of the scene. That's when I noticed it, the shadow of a figure across the street watching me from beneath a street lamp. I stepped out, hand near my holster, calling out. The figure turned, slipped into the alley, and vanished before I could close the distance. But on the ground where they'd stood was a cigarette butt, still warm, smoldering against the wet pavement. Not a coincidence. Someone had wanted me to see them. Someone was pulling the strings, waiting for me to dance. Back at the office, I laid out the pieces. Nathaniel's death staged to look like a robbery. The missing phone. Emily's shaky testimony about a politician with dirty hands, and the ghost of a watcher who wanted me to know I wasn't alone in the hunt. Every case has a smell to it. This one reeked of power, money, and secrets buried too deep for daylight. The kind that crush anyone who dares to dig. But I wasn't anyone. I was Detective Logan, and I wasn't about to let some kid's truth rot at the bottom of the river. What I didn't know yet was how personal this case would get. How close I'd come to breaking myself trying to solve it. How one clue, small and unassuming, would unravel everything. Because the very next morning the missing phone showed up. Not in evidence, not at the scene, but sitting on my desk like a gift from the devil. And when I turned it on, there was only one message waiting. It was a voice recording. Nathaniel's voice, breathless, terrified, saying words that froze my blood. "They know, and if you're hearing this, detective, they're coming for you next." The recording ended with a click that echoed in the hollow of my chest. I played it again, hoping I'd misheard, hoping maybe it was the rain against the window or the static of an old speaker. But no. Nathaniel's voice was clear. He hadn't been leaving a note for anyone else. He'd been leaving it for me. That's the kind of thing that makes a detective's skin crawl. A dead kid predicting your name before the city even knows you're on the case. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. Someone had shoved me into the center of this mess, and they wanted me to know it. The phone had no other files, no contacts, no apps, no trace of whoever had wiped it. Just that recording, hanging in the digital void like a cigarette burn on fresh paper. I locked the office door, poured myself a double shot and lit another smoke. The city outside droned on with the usual noises, horns, footsteps, voices lost in the maze of alleys. But to me, it all sounded different now. Heavier. Like every shadow on the street had my name on it. By morning, I had a list of people tied to Nathaniel's so-called investigation. Emily Carver was at the top, but she wasn't alone. Nathaniel had been spotted meeting with two others in recent weeks, a professor of constitutional law named Gregory Miles and a local journalist named Dana Rourke. Professor Miles was my first stop. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel underfoot. He sat behind his desk like a king on his throne, half buried in stacks of papers and books that smelled of dust and disuse. I slid the name Nathaniel Crane across the desk. The professor's eyes narrowed just slightly. It was the kind of flicker you only catch if you've been in the game as long as I have. He was a good student, Miles said, his tone flat. Ambitious, too ambitious. Sometimes ambition gets you into places you don't belong. I pressed him, asked what Nathaniel had been digging into. Miles leaned back, steepling his fingers, eyes glinting in the afternoon light. You think I'd know that? Students come and go. They chase crusades, then they disappear. Some of them don't make it out. He said it like he was talking about a storm on the horizon, inevitable and distant, but there was sweat on his collar. His voice cracked once, faint, but there. He knew more. He wasn't going to give it up in that office, not with books lining the walls and every word meant to intimidate. I left him with a warning. If Nathaniel died because of what he was chasing, and you're holding something back, I'll find out. And when I do, you'll wish you'd spoken sooner. He didn't answer, just smiled thinly and adjusted his glasses. But I caught the tremor in his hand as he reached for a paperweight. That told me enough. Next, I went after Dana Rourke. Journalists are easy to spot in this city, always running late, always running scared, always one step from burning themselves alive with the stories they chase. Dana was no exception. I found her in a cramped newsroom that smelled of ink and old coffee, her desk stacked high with drafts she'd never print. When I said Nathaniel's name, she froze. Her pen dropped, clattering against the wood. Then she laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that echoed too loud in the silence. "Of course you'd be the one on this," she said. "Of course they'd send Detective Logan." I didn't like her tone. "Who's they?" I asked. But she shook her head, eyes darting around like we were surrounded by ears. "You don't understand. This isn't just about some politician or dirty money. It's bigger. You're already in it, whether you know it or not. If I talk, I'm finished. If you keep digging, so are you. She tried to push me out of her office, but I planted my feet. Listen, Dana, Nathaniel's dead. Whoever he trusted enough to work with, it's you. If you know something, you owe him the truth. Otherwise, his blood's on your hands just as much as theirs. She stopped cold. Her shoulders sagged. And then, just when I thought she might spill it, she whispered, "Come back tonight. 9 o'clock. The diner on 5th. I'll give you what you need, but don't follow me now. Don't make them suspicious." It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. And cracks, if you're patient, turn into collapses. The rest of the day dragged like lead. I kept turning over Nathaniel's recording in my head. "They're coming for you next." Words like that don't leave your skull. They hammer in, reminding you every set of footsteps behind you could be the last sound you hear. At 8:30, I was parked across from the diner, rain smearing the neon lights across my windshield. By 9, Dana walked in, trench coat tight around her, eyes scanning the room like a cornered animal. I gave her 5 minutes to settle, then stepped inside. She sat in the back booth, half-shadowed, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. "You came," she said. "Start talking," I told her. She leaned in, voice low, urgent. Nathaniel was digging into campaign funds, money funneled through shell companies into the hands of a man named Victor Hale. You know the name? I knew it. Everyone did. Hale was a rising star, a politician who wore charm like armor and shook hands with half the city. But behind the curtain, he was rumored to be dirtier than a sewer drain. Dana slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of bank transfers, checks, signatures, enough to put Hale in a vice grip if it held up. But before I could ask more, the bell over the door chimed. 2 men stepped inside, heavy coats, heavier expressions. They didn't order food. They didn't need to. Their eyes were locked on Dana. She saw them too. Panic flashed across her face. "It's too late," she whispered. "They found me." I reached for my sidearm under the table, but before I could draw, Dana bolted. She shoved the envelope into my coat pocket and ran for the kitchen door. The 2 men followed, shoving past me like I was furniture. By the time I got outside, the alley was empty. Just rain slicking the pavement, trash cans overturned, and the faint sound of footsteps disappearing into the night. Dana was gone. The envelope felt heavier in my pocket than any gun I'd ever carried. The evidence was real, damning, and worth killing for. Which meant one thing: the walls were closing in. I drove straight back to my office, heart pounding like a war drum. I barely had time to hang my coat before the phone rang. I answered. Silence, just silence. Then a click. When I glanced at the window, I saw it again. That same shadow from the pier. Watching. Waiting. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a noose tightening around my neck. And I had to find out who was pulling the rope before I was the next body left floating in the river. The city never sleeps, but sometimes it dreams ugly. That night I sat in my office with the blinds half closed, the rain tapping like fingernails against the glass, the envelope of evidence lying on my desk like a ticking bomb. Hale's name was all over it. Too many numbers, too many accounts, too many ghosts of dollars moving through the shadows. If even half of it was true, he wasn't just a corrupt politician. He was a kingpin wearing a crown made of blood money. I poured myself another drink, but the whiskey burned sharper than usual. Maybe it was my nerves. Maybe it was because I kept thinking of Dana. Vanished into thin air like the city had swallowed her whole. I had her evidence, sure, but evidence without a witness is just paper, and paper burns. At dawn, I went back to the precinct. The place was buzzing, but not in a good way. My captain pulled me aside, voice low. "Logan, what the hell are you into? Words floating that you've been seen nosing around Hale's circle. That's dangerous turf." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The captain knew me well enough to understand I wouldn't let this go. He sighed, shaking his head. "Just don't end up a headline, Logan. The city's already got too many ghosts." I walked out before he could say more. The evidence in my pocket weighed me down. My next stop had to be Hale himself. If the snake was real, I needed to look him in the eye. Victor Hale's office was polished marble and quiet menace. He greeted me with a politician's smile. Too perfect, too white. hiding teeth sharp enough to cut. His handshake was firm, his cologne thick enough to choke. "Detective Logan," he said smoothly, like we were old friends. "I've heard of you. A man of persistence, they say. What can I do for the city's finest?" I didn't waste time. I laid one of the photocopies on his desk, watched his eyes flick down, then back up at me. The smile never wavered, but something colder slid into his gaze. "That," he said, tapping the paper, "is a forgery. A slanderous piece of fiction from desperate people who want to ruin reputations. I hope you didn't risk your career bringing me fairy tales." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a tone meant to intimidate. "Careful where you dig, detective. You might find yourself buried." I didn't blink. Funny. That's exactly what Nathaniel Crane must have heard before he ended up dead at the pier. The mask cracked for just a second. His jaw tightened. His fingers drummed the desk once before stilling. Then he leaned back and forced another smile. "Enjoy your day, detective." He didn't throw me out. He didn't need to. The warning was clear. I left his office with the taste of bile in my mouth. Every instinct screamed he was involved, but men like Hale don't leave fingerprints. They use others to do their dirty work, which meant I had to find his hands, the ones that pulled the trigger. That night, I tailed one of his aides, a slick-haired kid named Raymond Cross. He wasn't careful, not the way a man in Hale's orbit should be. He slipped into a rundown bar on the east side, the kind of place where secrets drown in cheap liquor. I followed him in, kept to the shadows, nursed a drink while I watched him whisper to a man in the corner booth. Couldn't hear much, but I caught a name. Emily. My blood went cold. Emily Carver, the law student, Nathaniel's friend. The two men finished quickly. Cross left out the back. The other man, scarred face, heavy coat, lit a cigarette and lingered. That's when I walked over. He looked me up and down, smirked. "Detective Logan. Thought you might show up sooner or later." I slid into the booth opposite him. "What do you know about Emily Carver?" He blew smoke across the table, eyes narrowing. Enough to know she's in over her head. She thought she could play both sides, thought she could keep her hands clean. But in this city, no one stays clean. I pressed harder, but he just chuckled, crushed his cigarette into the ashtray and walked out. No name, no trail, just another ghost in the maze. I rushed to find Emily, but by the time I got to her apartment, the door was ajar, the place torn apart, papers scattered, drawers overturned, and in the middle of the chaos, a single Polaroid pinned to the wall with a knife. It was Emily, tied to a chair, eyes wide with terror. On the bottom of the photo, scrawled in red ink, "Stop." I tore the picture down, fury boiling in my chest. They had her, they wanted me to know, and they wanted me scared enough to back off. But fear's a funny thing. It sharpens some men, breaks others. For me, it lit a fire that could burn the whole city down. I knew I couldn't go through the precinct. Too many ears, too many leaks. If Hale's reach was as deep as I suspected, half the department was probably bought. I had to play this my way. I went back to my office, spread out everything I had. The photo, the bank records, the notes from Emily's interview, the memory of Nathaniel's last recording. Patterns started to form. Cross, Hale, Emily, Dana, wherever she was, and that shadow that kept following me. At midnight, the phone rang again. Same silence, same click. But this time, a voice followed. "Detective Logan, you're getting close, too close. Walk away, or we'll finish what we started with the Crane boy." I gripped the receiver, knuckles white. "You think you can scare me off? You'll have to do better." A chuckle, low, mocking. Then the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding. Whoever they weren't just threatening me, they were daring me. And I don't turn down dares. I spent the next day chasing ghosts. Cross was gone. Hale was untouchable. The scarred man had vanished into the city's underbelly. Every lead turned to smoke. Until late that evening, when I got a knock at my office door. I opened it to find a kid, maybe 15, holding a folded piece of paper. "Guy told me to give this to you," he muttered, then bolted down the hall before I could ask who. The paper was simple, an address scrawled in messy ink and a time midnight. It was a trap, it had to be. But it was also the only lead I had. I strapped on my shoulder holster, pocketed the Polaroid, and stepped into the night. The address led me to an abandoned warehouse by the river, the kind of place where echoes live longer than men. I pushed the door open, gun drawn, senses razor sharp. The inside smelled of rust and oil. My footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. And then, in the center of the room, lit by a single hanging bulb, was Emily, still tied to a chair, still alive. But before I could move, the shadows around her shifted. Figures stepped forward, 3 of them, guns glinting under the light. And from the far side of the warehouse, another figure emerged. Polished shoes, tailored suit, smile sharp as a blade. Victor Hale. "Detective Logan," he said, spreading his arms like a host welcoming a guest. "I told you to be careful where you dig. Now look at the mess you've made." Hale's voice filled the warehouse like it owned the air. The sound bounced off the walls, mixing with the slow drip of water from the pipes above. I kept my gun steady, trained between his eyes. Though my heart hammered so loud I swore the men with him could hear it. Emily sat behind him, tied tight, gagged now. Her eyes pleaded with me, wide and wet. "You put the kid in the ground," I said, my voice low, sharp. "Nathaniel Crane, you staged it sloppy. Thought you could pass it off as a mugging. But he left me something. His phone, his voice. And now I've got enough to sink you." Hale's smirk didn't move. He stepped closer, the light catching the rings on his fingers. "Detective, you've been in this game too long to believe evidence alone matters. Paper gets shredded, witnesses vanish, and voices, they get drowned out by the machine." I tightened my grip on the trigger. "Maybe. But you made one mistake." He tilted his head, curious, amused. "Oh, enlighten me." "You made it personal." His smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. Then it returned, sharper. "Personal?" I nodded toward Emily. "You dragged her in. You took down her. You thought you could scare me off, but all you did was light a fire." One of his men shifted, aiming his gun. I swung mine quick, fired. The cracks split the silence, echoing like thunder. The man dropped. Chaos exploded. The other 2 drew fast, shots sparking against the steel beams. I dove behind a stack of crates, bullets tearing through wood and dust. My ears rang, my lungs burned. I counted shots, waited for their rhythm. Emily screamed against the gag, muffled, desperate. Hale barked orders, his calm slipping. I popped out, fired again. One man caught it in the shoulder, spun back, gun clattering. The other kept firing wild, missing by inches. I rolled, came up low, and put him down with 2 shots clean through the chest. Smoke stung my eyes, the warehouse thick with gunpowder and echoes. Hale stood alone now, gun in his hand, Emily still tied behind him. He pressed the barrel to her head, his mask gone, sweat running down his temple. "Drop it, Logan," he snarled, "or she dies." I froze, gun trained on him. My pulse thundered. Emily's eyes met mine, terrified, but steady. She trusted me. That trust was a weight heavier than the gun in my hand. Hale sneered. "You think you're some hero? You're just another piece on the board. I move, you bleed. That's how this city works." I steadied my aim, breathing slow. "The thing about men like you, Hale, you always think you're the one moving the pieces, but you forget. Sometimes the board fights back." His finger tightened on the trigger, and that's when Emily moved. She jerked her chair sideways, hard, throwing his aim off. The shot went wide, blasting wood instead of bone. I didn't hesitate. One squeeze, one shot. Hale's eyes went wide, a mix of shock and rage. The bullet caught him clean, dropping him to the concrete with a sound that still echoes in my skull. Silence followed, heavy, final. I rushed forward, cut Emily loose. She clung to me, shaking but alive. The relief in her eyes was a kind of light I hadn't seen in years. "You're safe now," I told her, though the words felt hollow. "Nobody's ever really safe in this city. Not for long." We walked out together into the night, the rain washing the blood and smoke from our skin. The sirens were already distant, growing closer, but I didn't wait for backup. Didn't want the paperwork. Didn't want the politics. By dawn, Hale was a headline. "Rising political star found dead in warehouse shootout." The papers dressed it up, made it neat, but the truth was uglier than print could handle. Dana's body turned up 2 days later, floating near the docks. They'd silenced her before I could protect her. That one stuck in my throat. Emily lived, but the shadows would haunt her. Nathaniel was still gone. His fight ended before it could begin. Me? I walked the streets, coat collar up, cigarette glowing against the dark. This case had chewed me up, spit me out. It proved something I'd known all along. Justice in this city isn't clean. It's jagged, cruel, and it costs more than most are willing to pay, but I'm not most. I'm Detective Logan, and I don't get to walk away. Not from cases like this. Not from the ghosts they leave behind. Sometimes late at night I hear Nathaniel's voice again. They're coming for you next. Maybe he was right, maybe they still are. But until they get me, I'll keep digging, keep fighting, keep burning through the lies, one case at a time. Because this city may be broken, but it's still mine. And as long as I'm breathing, I won't let the darkness swallow it whole. The case that nearly broke Detective Logan. It didn't end clean, it didn't end happy, but it ended. And sometimes that's the best a detective can hope for.